Hi, and welcome back to the second and final installment of our video lectures for Module 1. I hope that you enjoyed the first half of it. I know it's a lot of information to cover, but luckily you have the technological ability to stop and take breaks and rewind and look at things over and over again until you are feeling confident. So look at what technology can do for us. Yay. What we're going to do now is be more critical in how we're defining technology. So as we were moving along with the 6 replies in the previous video, we did take a few moments to sort of point out some of the problems with how these technologies are defined and described. But I want to head into a bit more detail for you to help you understand maybe some of the problematic assumptions that operate under the surface of when we define technology. So we're going to start off first with a discussion exercise. So what we're going to do now is I have linked an article called What a Decade on the Edge of Change Has Taught Me About the Future. And what you are going to be doing is engaging these 7 points that was raised by the author. So what it looks like as we flip over to part 2 of our notebook, it is our first exercise in part 2. So think stop number 2. And so you can click on the link and it will open the article for you. You can read it. It's a very short read. And what you are going to be doing is using the comment box. You are responding to one of the truisms that was raised in the article. And I give you information about what it is that your comment ideally should exemplify. So you're going to first identify which truism that you are referring. And then you're going to discuss what you think is meant by that truism. So I did post an example, a little starter, and see how short it is? I'm not asking for a whole lot for you here. So I'm going to leave that for you to do. How about you take a moment, pause the video, go in and read the article and write your response, and then come back when you are feeling ready. All right, see you in a bit. Hi, welcome back. I hope you found the article that you were working on a bit interesting and helpful to see how what sorts of examples that your fellow classmates can bring to the fore to share in this idea. So what you're probably starting to piece together is that defining and describing technology is full of all sorts of hidden assumptions that we make about it. So what we are going to do together is take a look at some of those assumptions. So we're going to look at 4 in our class. I'm sure there's many more that you could probably pick out, but I think these 4 are the meatiest and essential ones that we need to pay attention to and try to understand. So when we're thinking and talking about technology, we often assume 4 things. We think that technological fixes can solve social problems. We often think that technology represents progress in civilization. We often unwarrantedly assume that technology is a force for equality. And finally, we make assumptions that technology is a power that serves humanity. You'll notice that in brackets I have these words, and these are some of the key words that we are seeking to understand by the end of this module. So if you remember all the way back in the first video when I addressed the learning outcomes for this module, when I talked about the 7 terms, these are the terms that apply. So I just wanted to make that a bit more clear for you to see. So let's hop in. So assumption number one, we often wrongly assume that technology can fix problems. And in some cases, it is very effective. But it's very specific and limited to what kinds of problems technology can address. Technology is highly effective at technological fixes and technical fixes. So, for example, plagiarism detection software that's used by many professors, including myself, that's a really elegant and technical solution to a technical problem. They can, the makers of these plagiarism detection software programs can create algorithms that quickly can address when students are using work uncredited. Another example of a technical fix that is excellent are things like non-adhesive paint on buildings in high graffiti areas. So many businesses around the world were getting pretty sick of really yucky graffiti being left on their buildings. So paint manufacturers came up with a technical fix of a non-adhesive paint that can be put onto the sides of buildings to make the graffiti easier to clean off. Where technology fails is where it is less effective in dealing with non-technical problems. So things like sanitation, health, and urban sprawl. And I'm using these examples here. Here is a picture, I believe from 1902, of downtown Toronto. And this scaffolding is the scaffolding of the subway system that they are building. And what makes this example a really interesting one is that building a subway was meant to be a technical fix for poor sanitation issues in the core of the city. So you can see these quite big apartments for its time and kind of cramped living quarters. The sanitation in these areas was pretty poor. It was hard to run the right kinds of pipes that reached all of the units in these buildings. So it was a public health nightmare, and rates of TB and other sorts of highly communicable diseases were being spread rapidly. So as a way to kind of cut down on these diseases born of sanitation problems, the city invested thousands and thousands of dollars to build a subway system which would take people to live outside of the core of the city, and in fact come up and live in suburbs. This we owe to the development of urban sprawl, which is a term used by architects and city planners to describe essentially a transportation system that leads people out of the core to live outside of a city with a bit more space, but in pretty condensed areas as well. So overall, the assumption that technology fixes problems is it's not accurate. We have recognized that technology is very good at fixing technical problems, not social ones. So understanding this distinction will be really helpful for when you begin analyzing and evaluating sources of technology. And to build on this, in fact, technology often creates problems for it to solve. Technology doesn't always respond to existing needs. In fact, a new technology often creates its own needs. Really handy example of this is the development of Bayer aspirin. And this is a advert from the 1950s showing all of the ways in which Bayer aspirin can be used. So we've got the housewife with a headache. We've got the football player who doesn't want to suffer from a fever and a cold so that he can continue to play his game. We've got a mailman with a backache and a nicely dressed lady. She dresses way better than I do at home, who has a sore throat due to a cold. But here's the thing. The use of aspirin to lower fevers is an invented problem. Because think about the biological necessity of why the human body runs a fever. When the human body is infected with a virus or bacteria, the body creates basically a warming effect, which is the fever. And what that is meant to do is to biologically cook out and make very uncomfortable the body so that the virus or the bacterium cannot spread. So there's an issue in taking aspirin in order to lower a fever. You're actually getting in the way of the body's ability to fight disease. So it is a set of problems that Bayer thought of that their product can then help with. And I'm going to give you a few moments to pop over to our notebook and try your hand at sharing some problems that are not really problems, that they're more of a solution. I've added one here, which is, you can see it here, is a particular cake slicing device. Slicing a piece of cake isn't really a problem, but this handy fix apparently is there to help us ease cake slicing anxiety. So that's my contribution, and I can't wait to see yours here. So take a moment, pause the video now, and we'll meet back here when you're all done. Welcome back. I hope you had some fun with that last exercise. There's one other important note to make about the assumption that technology can fix problems. And it's to note that often that the goals achieved through the use of technology don't always have to be practical ones either. So we've looked at how sometimes a technology can create a problem that it solves, but sometimes there's no problem to solve. Sometimes inventions and creators make things just to make something, to see if it will work. So while most inventions seek to improve the welfare of individuals and communities, so things like comfort and safety and efficiency, some innovations, as we see here in the very frustrated head-mashing computer keyboard mannequin design, some innovations are developed simply for the challenge and enjoyment of solving a technical problem. This is called technological enthusiasm, and we will see examples of this over and over again in the course. And now that you have the term, you'll probably start seeing it in your daily life more often. So we'll be checking in to see if we can share some of our very strange technologically enthusiastic inventions from time to time. Moving on, though, to the second assumption that we often erroneously make about technology. And it's this, that we think that technology represents progress in civilization. And on the surface, it does seem to, right? That the ability to transform a society or social life of a community in a certain way does tend, from the vantage point of looking back into history, seem to be a progress. And it seems to also allow for advancements in our ethical reasoning and our moral reasoning. So we tend to think of our moral and cultural ideas as markers of civilization. So you can kind of see how progress in civilization tends to get lumped together into this assumption. But let's think more clearly about this for a moment. The assumption rests on the fact that technology tends to be dynamic and cumulative. So just as I mentioned, as we kind of look back at human history, we kind of see the big changes and the cumulative effects of technology. But only few of human endeavors of creativity can maintain continuous development and growth, and also improvement. So technologies sort of reach a height and then kind of peter out, and less people use them, or they are used less in other technologies. So it's not necessarily the case that there is a straight line of progress between big inventions and sparks of technological advancement. We can also think about the fact that a society is able to develop and make some very advanced technologies, but it is in itself not a guarantee of advanced thinking in other areas. When you think about the ability of the Nazis during the Second World War to build the V2 rocket, basically it was a flying bomb that could be sent from afar and devastate populations quite indiscriminately during wartime. So you have an extremely technologically advanced culture, but creating something that has ethically dubious and, in fact, devastating effects on human life. So this idea that the use of advanced technologies doesn't mean that the thinking will be advanced in other areas of human cultural life. So the term progress has to then be used with some precision when applied to the development of technology only. So I'm using here the example of the V2 rocket, because the V2 technology later became used in powering and using the fueling technologies to power rockets into space during the space age. And if you're really interested in this sort of development of technology and some of the ethical implications, in addition to the technical ones, I have added a little article here in our notebook that you can take a peek at and read at your own pace. Now, there's a few more points to make about this notions of rationality and progress that play into this assumption that it needs to be said that rationality is not specific to a group of people. I know I've said this before in the last video when we talked about rationality and progress. But it is always worth mentioning that no one rationality or tradition is particular to this attribute. Rationality is shared amongst all human cultures. And modern societies are often highly irrational. I do want to point out, there's a little treat that I threw in to this point, that when we're thinking about this assumption and this idea that technological advancement in some areas prevents irrationality, it really doesn't. This is a little video that I found of a 77-year-old woman in the United States who is throwing a level 3 hissy fit in the middle of a Costco store because she does not want to wear a mask, which is the store's policies. So it just goes to speak to this idea that technological progress does not save you from irrational actions and behaviors. And, you know, there's something kind of fun watching somebody have a full-on toddler hissy fit. Another point that I think is worth raising is that rationality also doesn't confer moral superiority. In fact, it's quite the contrary. Major ethical transgressions are often hastened and brought forth by technological progress. And you can see this, that any time that there's an advancement, especially in healthcare technologies, there's also major pushback and resistance against the consequences, whether intended or unintended. So if you think about the development of the birth control pill for women in the 1960s, or the physician-assisted suicide policies that are becoming more and more broadly used in states. All of these technological moments of progress have major ethical transgressions and pushback and resistance. And, this needs to be said too, that there's nothing in the rational approach to the world that prevents the use of logically and empirically derived means in the service of goals that are neither rational nor ethically justifiable. Really what I'm getting at here is that just because something is technologically sound and scientifically supported and empirically derived and validated, and has the service of a specific goal, it still doesn't mean that it's rational or justifiable. So we need to keep that in mind when we're thinking about rationality and progress. Now, there are some objections to consider to this assumption as well, that, for some people, rationality can leave the world very disenchanted. So if you are studying sociology this semester, you will likely come across the work of Weber, who believed that. And, rationality as a movement leaves no room for traditional ideas and values and political structures that have, in the past, long sustained cultures. So there is a sense of kind of sterility or disenchantment that can occur when we are being overly rational about how we engage with the world. That goes to be said too of the second point, that rationality implies objectivity. There's a coolness or detachment from the world that needs to occur in order to understand that. And, scientific inquiry is based on the abstraction or the isolation of a part of the natural world being studied or manipulated. This runs the risk of being detached from the greater context or the environment around which we think about technological advancements. So, for example, environmentalism as an ideology and as a set of practices is actually fairly recent in human history. We started seeing it in the 1960s and 70s. There were kind of points historically where people were concerned about pollution and contamination of land or killing of certain kinds of animals. But on the whole, the idea that environmentalism is a response to the context of nature and humans' place in the natural world sort of speaks to this limit of rationality and application of objectivity. We didn't think of our effects of mining and smelting and manufacturing in a way that contextualized it in the larger natural world. So even though the technologies that we've developed to extract oil and gas and to be able to manufacture all manners of goods, we applied rationality very limitedly. So that's another thing to consider when we think about how we can critique rationality in progress. I'm going to move on to assumption number 3, because I could talk about rationality forever and ever and ever. But let's move forward into this third assumption, that technology is a force for equality. So the sophistication and complexity of contemporary technologies preclude the direct involvement by and of all of those but those immediately concerned. That makes the rest of us passive consumers who are content to reap the benefits but are ignorant of how it works. So all of us are guilty of this to some extent. There are a myriad of technologies that, quite frankly, I have no idea how they work or how they came to be. And I'm sure we can all think of examples of this kind. But what this does is actually make an unequal playing field. So this gives rise to a very important paradox that we will be coming back to over and over again in this course. And it doesn't have a fancy name other than technological paradox number 1. And, it's a sense that we have access to a wide variety of very powerful technologies, yet our ability to understand them and their consequences leave us powerless. Only the people who created or designed these technologies fully understand what it's capable of, and that confers a sense of power. In a very similar way, there is an assumption, and this is assumption number 4, that technology is a power that serves humanity. So, assumption 3, we think that technology makes things an equal playing field. Assumption number 4 is that technology is a power that serves humanity. And the response to this assumption is really quite interesting, because there's 2 sort of schools of thought that occur, and that throughout this course we are going to be returning to over and over again. So it's a good idea to make sure that you've written this down somewhere and you return to it and practice and study these 2 concepts, because they are really powerful and important to our exploration of technology. So, on the one hand, people who believe in what is called technological determinism, they feel that technology acts as an independent force in our life, and that it's unaffected by social forces. So, to put it another way, people who are technologically determinists think that technology determines human behavior, that it is the technology that makes us do certain things and behave in certain ways. So, for example, I know myself included, and many of my friends, we often complain about how we tend to stay up late and stay too long scrolling through social media, even though we don't like often what we're reading, or we're bored by the whole bit of social media, yet we continue to do it. A technological determinist would argue that that use of technology makes us feel like we have no other choice. It determines our behavior. We are wired to want to scroll and get grumbly when people say things we don't like, or be really happy when people post pictures of their pets. So that's technological determinism on the one hand. Compare that then with the opposite view. So people who believe this opposite view often believe in what's called the social construction theory of technology. And this is the belief that technology is shaped by human social arrangements and forces such as political power, social class, gender, and organizational dynamics. So, where technological determinists argue that the technology itself determines human behavior, social constructionists argue that we, based on our social class, maybe our access to political power, our gender, our organizational dynamics, where we live, all of these social features are shaping how it is that humans interact with technology. So, taking the example of staying up late and disturbing sleep habits by scrolling on social media at night, someone who believes in social construction theory would look at maybe an argument that takes into consideration the psychological needs of people to scroll social media at night, even though they don't get anything out of it or don't want to be doing that. They might be able to then look at greater patterns. Maybe it's specific to a certain social class of people. Maybe more women than men engage in the technology in that way. So you can see now the differences between these two approaches and how, going back to the central assumption here, that if technology is a power that serves humanity, it might have different ways that we can answer that question. So, now, is this helpful? Probably not. It's kind of like a fire hose of information, but that's okay. Understanding the human relationship with technology is incredibly complex and complicated, and both the social construction theory and the deterministic theory are dynamic processes that are characterized by reciprocal interactions of a host of factors. So there's so many things going on that it is actually really hard to narrow it down. But, to make a plug for social constructivism here, it does offer the possibility of human agency, where technological determinism doesn't. Humans can make choices. The technology, unless it's in them controlling their every movement, does not have that power. So we could see that social constructivist still has a bit of an advantage over deterministic theories, and that particular technologies may be devised, selected, and disseminated because they serve the interests of a particular group, possibly in opposition to the interests of other groups. So there is a huge kind of contextual concern that is at play as well. The moral of the story here is what is written at the bottom here, that technology has the ability to confer power. If you have technology and you're able to use it and be able to understand how it's used and made, then you have a certain sort of power in the world. And that is very important to remember as we move forward in this class. So, the last little thing for you to do for this module is to use our Sutori notebook to share your insights in response to one of the following questions. So you can answer either, do you think technology is always progressive and why? And draw on two terms that's brought up in class. Do you think that technology is always rational and civilizing? Or do you think that we are the servants or masters of technology? So you can answer any one of these in our notebook, and you will see it here ready for you. So you just click on the dialog box and you are ready to input your wonderful ideas, and I look forward to reading these. The last little bit, when you are feeling like you want to practice some of the things that you have come to learn through these module videos, is take time to have some practice tests and quizzes. So there's some more here for you. This is a little matchup game that you can play and get some feedback on how your understanding is coming along. And this is it. We've come to the end of our very first module for this course. Wow, that's a lot. Thank you so much for sticking with me today. Before you head off and kind of work away at the rest of this module over the next 2 weeks, please note that there is a graded quiz that will be starting in week 3. And it is due on Friday, October 2nd. And you'll have the whole week to, it will be open for the whole week. And you can take it at any time that's most convenient for you. But as long as it's there before that deadline, you are golden. And the next set of modules that we will be starting in week 4, you will be exploring the methods and perspectives on how to judge the social impacts of technology. So we've covered a lot of stuff today. You have this week and next to sort of wrap your mind around all of these new ideas and concepts. And of course, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can always write me a note, give me a call, or leave some of your comments in our notebook, and I'll be sure to reach out to you and respond. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope you really enjoyed it. All right, have a great week, and congrats, you're done Module 1. Yay! Bye!